In this last part of a 3-part video tutorial series, in Miliastra Wonderland Beyond mode, we will be making a recreation of the Hat JellyFish from Fontaine. This video is a bit more complicated and involves more concepts than the previous 2 parts of this video series, so remember to take breaks. Let's start off with going to the Prefab library. Zoom out, and we will be making another... Actually, we're not making a empty model this time. We're looking for target balloon. Let's see, where is it? This one. And we're choosing this one because it has a preset status. That means it has a built-in kind of animation that comes with it. This is going to be very handy, and we'll teach you how to animate this, how to toggle this back and forth. So let's first, it's a bit too big, so let's change the size of this. We'll disable the native collision because we want the player to be able to get sucked in. Target balloon. Yeah, I'll call target balloon. Actually no, I will target humongous Hat JellyFish. Let's call it Hat JellyFish because that's what it kind of is in the Fontaine mechanic. So in the component section, we will add a component. We use a character disruptor device again. This time we'll be using traction device. Traction device has a destination. In this case, we will set it to 15y, so that's all the way up there. The radius is how big. It's kind of hard to see. If you see here, this faint outline is the radius of it being reaching target. This is useful when we use this value, Boolean value here, stop when reaching destination. So within the 2 meters of this destination, in this case 2 meters from the radius, we'll set the velocity to 6, give the stable phase duration to 3, and we'll leave the decay to 1. Next, we're in the trigger area. We will move down a bit. Move down and increase the volume around here. This is fine. Changes. And now, when we go to the entity placement, if we drop the Hat JellyFish here, let's give it a try. Let's play. So when we touch it, it shoots us out. Let's abandon this for now. Now that we have the Hat JellyFish that shoots us up, we want to change the preset status. In the Hat JellyFish, we want to change this. So that has this cool animation. To start off, we'll go back to Prefab library, so we can edit Prefab. Select our Hat JellyFish. In the component section, we're going to add a common component, and this time we're using collision trigger. Go to advanced editing for it. Add. And then we want to change the effective target to just characters. We don't really care about objects or creations. These are like monsters and slimes and all that. We just want characters here. And we'll change the zoom multiplier by 333. So that around fits right the model. Close this. Save it. Now we need to add the actual nodes involved. So let's go ahead and open the Miliastra sandbox. See over here. So within our server node graphs, let's create a new node graph, and we'll call it Hat JellyFish. Double click on it, and we are looking for the event for collision trigger. There's 2. We are looking for when entering collision trigger. So when we enter a collision trigger, let's grab the jellyfish, which is the self entity, which because the node graph will be attached to the jellyfish. And I want to set the preset status. That'll be the target. Plug in the execution path. And then for the preset status index, we can hop back in the Genshin. Put the info here. Preset status index. These 10101 kind of numbers. There's a handy copy symbol here. We'll click that to copy it. And then we want to change the index to 1. So let's go to the sandbox. Paste that index in, and we want to change it to 1. Save. And now, let's add the snow graph. Hat JellyFish. Override, save it. Now, when we collide, or we have this, we trigger the collision trigger, we should see change the preset status so it will look like it's animating. Let's see here. So it only animates once. See again. Press retry. Yep, there goes. There's the animation. So there's a couple of things we want to work on. First, we kind of want the player to be sucked into it because that's how it works in Fontaine. Second, we want it to not just trigger once. We want it to trigger constantly when we get sucked in and get pushed up. And third, the timing seems a bit off where the animation doesn't really match the trigger traction device. So we'll work on that. So to start us off, we want to suck the player in. In order to do so, we could have a force field on it. However, if you notice, when we click on our Hat JellyFish, there's only one disruptor that can be enabled. It's either none or the traction device. And if we add another disruptor device, it says cannot be added repeatedly. So that means we have to make a new empty model with disable collision. And then we'll have the force field device here. So we'll create a character disruptor device for this new empty model. Go to advanced editing, add, and we'll have a force field device. I'm going to set the inner and outer both to 2 meters. Now set the direction to towards sphere center. And I'll set the speed to 8 and 8. Trigger area, we can change it to sphere. Set it to 2. There we have a little model here that sucks the player in. Now save it. We'll name it force field suck. So next, we need to actually create this kind of force field suck whenever we plot this down. We could, every time we have the jellyfish, drag in the force field here, but that's kind of hard, and it's kind of hard to place the actual spot. What we can do instead is that we go to a Hat JellyFish, go to the Miliastra sandbox, within the Hat JellyFish node graph we have here, it would go to when created. When entity is created. So this is going to trigger, this node is going to activate whenever the Hat JellyFish is created. So what we can do here is then call create prefab. And this will create a prefab at a specific location of our choosing. In this case, let's get the self entity, which will be the jellyfish that's being created here. We get the location. Get the rotation. Set the owner to the jellyfish. No override. And we want a prefab ID, so let's go back to Genshin. Let the force field suck. Copy this up here on the top right prefab ID. Click the copy icon. Paste it in. And now whenever we have this Hat JellyFish on the field, it will automatically create a force field suck exactly at the same location it was suck as in. So let's see. Yep. You can see we get sucked in. Also, notice how the traction device can't push us up because the force field is keeping us in. So we'll have to fix that. To fix that, we'll be utilizing unit status. And we'll go to the combat preset here and go to unit status on the left. We'll create a new status. We'll call traction trigger. So this unit status we'll be using to keep track of whether or not the traction device should be active and then the force field should be deactivated or the other way around. So duration of 1 is fine and we don't actually need to add as any effect. That's fine. Let's save it. Now what we'll be using is within the prefab library and the Hat JellyFish components, go to your Disruptor device setting, we'll be actually adding a Boolean filter to trigger whether or not the traction device should be active. So click this and open Miliastra Sandbox. And if it doesn't open, it might just be on the other window. So within the Miliastra Sandbox, on the top left, click Window, Client Node Graph Resource Explorer. Because Boolean node graphs are client-side run. It runs on the client side, not on the server. So let's open the Boolean filter node graph, open up the folder, right-click, create a new node graph. And we'll name it has traction trigger. So Boolean node graphs are a bit different. They have a node here that is what does it return? What's the result? In this case, we want to check if the target entity has unit status. And this is looking for the unit status ID. So we can go back to Genshin and unit status here. Top right, configuration ID for this traction trigger. We'll copy it, paste it in. So what this node graphs does is for the traction device, it'll look for the target entity, which is the target it's influencing. In this case, the character. And then it'll check does it have a unit status. If it has it, then yes, it should be triggered and we would shoot the player up. If it's no, then nothing happens. So let's go back to the prefab library. Select a Hat JellyFish, go into the Disruptor, and we can select the Boolean node graph we created has traction trigger. Overwrite and save the prefab. And now we want to do the same thing for the force field, except we want to do the opposite. So let's go to Sandbox, create a new client node, the Boolean filter node, and we'll call this node traction trigger. And we can just simply copy what we have in the has traction one. Let's open a no, paste it in, and drag out a not. So this inverses the result. Save this. Now when we go back to Genshin, we can select have the force field suck here. We do no traction trigger. Excellent. Now we actually need to apply the status. And in order to do that, we'll go back to the sandbox, go to the server node graphs, open up your Hat JellyFish. And we'll do that here when the player enters the collision trigger. Let's drag this out. Actually, let's deactivate this path. So when the player enters their collision trigger, we want to see, we want to create a timer first. I want to create a timer, and we'll associate the jellyfish to a timer, and then we'll name this delayed launch. So also doing at the same time is we're figuring out and matching the timing between the preset status and the traction device shooting up. So it's not going to loop. Within the timer status, you can drag the timer sequence part out. Go to operation node, and we'll look at assembly list. So this is probably translation error. This should be assemble list. Set the time to 0.5, so it'll fire in 0.5 seconds. And then we want to drag out, see, it should be when timer activates, when timer is triggered. So when timer is triggered, let's check if the actual timer is called delayed launch. Have a branch. This actually checks execution path where the timer is triggered, and it checks if if it's called delay launch. If it is, then we want to add unit status. And what we actually want to do is we want to add a unit status to the character that's within our collision trigger. So if we type in collision trigger, there should be this query node here. Get all entities within the collision trigger. So in this case, we are looking at the jellyfish's collision trigger, and we want the trigger ID. So let's go back to Genshin. Select the Hat JellyFish, and trigger ID is 1. See on the bottom right here? So 1. And then we want to loop through all the entities. So if it is the delay launch here, we want to start looping. And for each of the actual entities within the collision trigger, we want to add a unit status. And this will return the characters, the one character. If there's multiple characters in there, then it'll loop like 2 times. But in most cases, for our use case, there'll only be one. Drag this to the application target entity. The applier, we can keep it as nothing. We want the config ID, so let's go back. Find the unit status. Traction trigger, copy this. And we just want one stack. So let's see. We add the unit status here. Oh, we also want to have the animation trigger. And another thing we want is we actually want to disable, or actually more precisely, we want to refresh the traction device. Because the moment the character enters a traction device, it will do the Boolean check and say, does it have the traction trigger? And it will not check again unless it exits and enters back in again, or if it's turned off and on again. So what we want to turn it off here. So let's turn off device ID here would be 0. So if we go back to the prefab library, go to Hat JellyFish, notice how we can select kind of 2 devices here. One is the traction device, the other is none. None is device ID 0. So by doing so here, by setting the 0, we basically turn it off. And then when the timer triggers, when it loops and goes through everything, we want it turn back on, and then it would do the Boolean check. So the last thing we also want to do is we want to reanimate the preset status. Because right now, we only set it to 1 and never goes back to 0. So it won't do the nice bounce again. So what we need to do is we need to start another timer. I have another timer here. And this time, we name it reset launch. And we don't want to loop. Assemble list. We'll set it to 1 second. So now you can check if it's not the delay launcher. We want to check if the timer is actually named reset launch. Drag this in. So if it's reset launch, then what we want to do is we want to set the preset status 0. Would be self-entity also. So that resets the preset status. So that should be it. I'll scroll through so you can compare. The order of this doesn't exactly matter. Here's a quick look. Let's zoom in a bit, just in case. All right. So let's make sure this is saved. We'll go back to Genshin and let's test it out. This should suck us in. So it does the animation. And also does the sucking. Now that we have the Hat JellyFish, let's actually put it into use. Let's just move this. Here. Ease it up. The player will have to move up here, touch the jellyfish, and then we can raise the platform even higher. Let's see. Yeah, that's good. High enough. Okay. So let's test it out. Okay, that kind of works. Notice how it ejected that way? Because the ejector from the animal ring was still in effect. That's something you want to consider. Okay, let me try and get it to work where I overlap these. Let me start from the very here, start here. Touch the animal ring. And you see it goes sideways because the animal ring is still doing the ejector stuff. Now here's another problem that we can solve is if you just fall down, it's not going to catch it because the force field doesn't really apply at a horizontal upwards, not horizontal, vertical movement. So we're going to fix that. To fix that, we'll be using a unit status. In fact, we'll also hide the player while we're at it. So we go to combat preset, go to unit status, create a new status. We'll call it hide player no gravity. So what this does is we're gonna hide the player, and we're also gonna make no gravity for the player. Set the duration to 2. Effect details, and we're looking for character hidden. We're also looking for fall efficiency. Fall efficiency change value. So by default, it's at 0. So that means no change to how the gravity is accelerated. The lowest it can go is negative 200. That makes it so there's no additional gravity acceleration applied. And then character hidden here. By default, when you don't put a Boolean local filter to any of these, it returns true. However, when character hidden is true, the character is actually partially hidden. So we actually want a local filter to always return no. Let's save this first. And let's go into the sandbox. Open up the Client No Graph Resource Explorer. And within the Boolean filter, we'll create a new filter. Call it always no. What we're going to do here is we're just going to have, because we can't just plug in, there's no, as far as I know, there isn't just like a false or true. What I end up doing is I have a logical not operation, set this to yes. So because not yes is no, so this is always no. Save this, select the Genshin, and we can select always no. So that way, this is always no, which is an actual full invisible. You won't see a character model. Next, we actually need to apply this unit status. So let's go back to the sandbox, go to the Hat JellyFish, and we will apply it when the player enters the collision trigger. So over here, we'll add a unit status. And the target entity will be the entering entity here. So this will be the character that enters the collision trigger. The status config ID is this. Copy that. You just want one stack. So this should hide. Let's quickly test this out. Save. This won't solve our gravity issue entirely, and I'll demonstrate why. But let's make sure the character hidden actually works. So we should see the wings disappear. But yeah, the character is hidden. But you're still able to fall through. And the reason is because the gravity acceleration is already there. That velocity is already applied. There isn't more acceleration from the gravity, but there already is the velocity. What we can do to fix that is to use an ejector. Because if you remember with the ammo ring, the ejector kind of makes the character float. It negates gravity, and in fact, it also just kind of nulls out all the existing velocity to it. So what we need to do is let's go to Prefab library. And just like the force fields suck, we're going to create an empty model. We'll name it Ejector Float. Turn off the native collision. Go to Components, and we'll add a character disruptor device. We have an ejector, and let's just point it upwards. And the velocity and duration cannot be 0. Because if there's actually no influence in it, it's not going to do the whole negate gravity trick. So we'll set this 0.1 and duration is 0.5. And the trigger area, 222. That should do the trick. And now we can save this. And now we just have to create the ejector float just like we do with Force Field Suck whenever we put the jelly at fish. So let's go to the Hat JellyFish. And just copy this node here. The location. the rotation, and we just need to change the prefab ID. Copy this one, ejector float. And now, if we go ahead to Genshin, we should not fall through. See? Excellent. So notice how there's kind of a weird situation also happening. The lightning ball is not appearing for some of them. And I'm not sure exactly why this happens, but I think I have a fix. It probably has to do with some latency and the trigger area being a bit too small. So what we're going to do to kind of resolve that is go to Prefab Library here. And we're just going to increase the trigger area for this a bit. Let's kind of increase the traction device trigger. Also increase the collision trigger. And save this. We also make the force field a little bit. Do we need now? It's around the same size as this, right? Yeah. Now, if we test this, it should fix the problem we were seeing. Let's see. Okay, seems to be working fine. Okay, usually when there's something wonky, it probably has to do with latency. It could have to do with like the trigger area size. So if you increase it, it kind of makes it more reliable. When traction device is influencing the character can't move or glide. This is different than the ejector. The traction device forces a fixed lightning ball appearance. Not sure if Hoyo will allow us to change in the future, but that would be pretty nice if they do. One traction device, one ejector, and multiple force fields can influence the characters all at the same time. Only one traction device's effect can occur on a character. They don't stack. It's like the ejector. And that's the end of this video series. Thanks for watching.